Ahoy! Joe Buddy Hambone here, and I'm back again with a brand new coupon code from our friends over at Noble Knight Games. This month, the code is LEGENDS. It's good for 10% off orders of $10 or more now through November 19th. Noble Knight has all your RPG back-to-school needs. One-stop shop, and whether it's board games, magic cards, books, dice, whatever it may be, Noble Knight is the place to be. Using the code LEGENDS, good for 10% off orders of $10 or more, running now through November 19th, you can set yourself up pretty pre-holidays with everything you need to run some games for your friends and your family. So next time you're checking out at Noble Knight Games, don't forget to use the code LEGENDS. Good for 10% off orders of $10 or more, running now through November 19th. From our friends over at Noble Knight Games.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable, Stu Horvath. And today, folks, there's no joke. We are going to make a statement of fact right up front at the start of this show, and that is the term GOAT, greatest of all time. It gets thrown around a lot these days, and sometimes it gets thrown around a little too much. However, when you hear the term GOAT, you think of people like Michael Jordan, you think of people like Wayne Gretzky, you think about the nature boy Ric Flair. And when it comes to tabletop RPGs, none other than Erol Otus goes to the top of my list for GOAT, and we so happen to have him on the call today. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, the GOAT, Erol Otus. How you doing today, Erol?
Wow, I'm doing good. That's quite an intro. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. And listen, we have been so excited. You know, we had the idea a while back. It's like, could we get him? And Stu was like, I don't know. Let me see. And when he kind of came up at me out of nowhere, he's like, what do you think about Wednesday night? And I was like, I'll clear my calendar, because for us, this is huge. And we are so grateful that you're taking your time and sharing it with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for switching. That was really cool.
Tonight's Hambone's Dungeons and Dragons game.
Oh, man.
No, it's cool because everyone's like, you're canceling tonight? And I was like, well, we're interviewing Erol Otus. They're like, oh, yeah, no, that's cool. Just tell us about it next week. That's fine. Like, cancel for that. That is 100% okay.
Oh, good. You have an understanding group there. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a group of fans, so that definitely helps.
So I am dying to ask you something. Recently, I came across an issue of Dragon Magazine. I was going to post it to the Instagram feed, and I found this contest in the back. It was the results for like this second art contest that Dragon Magazine ran in 1979, and you came in as an honorable mention. Is that the first time that you were published by TSR?
Oh, no. I think it was the Dragon #2.
Oh, okay. So that's even earlier. Jeez.
Yeah, because we had been playing D&D for a while the strategic reviews were coming out.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember exactly when we started. I want to say 74, maybe late 74. And we noticed the strategic reviews at the game store, and we started picking those up. I think a couple had already come out. It might have been 4 or 5 when they were, I believe they announced that they were going to come out with the dragon. It was going to have color inside. And I just started sending in illustrations to them. Now, I can't remember if they had a message soliciting that or not, but yeah, I just started sending things in. And when the Dragon #2 came out and I opened it up, I saw this creature that I had sent in, and they had statted it up, and it was the Remoraz.
Ah,
And I don't think they let me know ahead of time it was going to be in there. So I was just blown away. I was like, ooh, top of the world.
so yeah, so that was a bit of fan art basically, and you just kind of peppered them with it until they took something. That's wild.
That's right. That's correct.
You see, that's awesome because, you know, when you're young, you always start stumbling upon different ways of being creative, right? So, you know, for me, I ended up being the guy who talks. But, you know, when I was a kid, I used to pull books out of the library, and it was always the Hanna-Barbera how to draw. Like, to this day, I can still draw a mean Huckleberry Hound. When you were coming up, what was like the first thing that you were like, you know, I want to draw this, or I like to draw this, and you kind of knew that this was going to be your thing?
Well, let's see, I had always been interested in, in monsters and science fiction and drawing those things from a very early age. And being inspired by, I guess, a certain amount of TV, like Ultraman and things like that. I remember when I would go over to my friend's house because they had a color TV, and it was really bad color, but it was color. And for some reason, they figured out how to get UHF before I did, and that's where Ultraman was. And I remember watching that and drawing giant monsters and things. And I think later on, going to the dime store and seeing the Edgar Rice Burroughs books with Roy Krinkle Jr. and Frazetta covers. That's thing, you just pull it out and look at it. Then I would just buy it because they were, literally, I think they were 25 cents or something. Those artists were an early influence on me for sure.
Well, very cool. And, clearly you can see a lot of that in your art through the years. I definitely think that stylistically, you found a really cool place to land like somewhere in between and still find a way to kind of make it your own. Like even in the way you draw helmets on the heroes in some of these adventures, like, when you say Ultraman, I can totally see that now.
Yeah. It's also a way to inject not necessarily humor, but a quirkiness that sometimes missing for me anyway, when things are just pure seriousness. It's something that the author Jack Vance really hit me with, the combination of desperate mortal danger and yet humor at the same time. And so putting outlandish hats on people is a way to inject a little, not necessarily fun, but whimsy into a dark situation.
I feel like there's a long-standing tradition with that, right? Like Elric has since become very, brooding and sort of melancholy figure. I recall a lot of early paperback covers where he's always wearing like a really funny hat. It taps into the sort of the alienness of the Melnibonian culture, but it also kind of makes you go like, why is he wearing a funny hat?
Yeah, Elric was pretty serious though.
This is true.
Yeah.
It's not like you were an old man when you started setting art to TSR, right? You were pretty young when you discovered D&D?
Yeah, I think we started playing in 74, and so I would have been 14. And I think the first that Remoraz was published in 76, I believe. And so that was when I was 16. And then I moved there and became a full-time staff artist for them in 79.
So you were like 19, 20 years old.
Yeah, 19, 20, 21 during the period I was there.
And you were kind of there for like a sort of astonishingly short period of time relative to like the amount of art that you produced, plus the fact that like so much of it is just, instantly iconic for so many people who followed Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we worked pretty hard there, but I was very lucky to be there at that time when D&D was exploding. For me, it was like a way of life. So it was a dream come true to work for them. But yeah, a short period of time. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, when you're that young, it seems like just those few years is a long time, and I felt like I had been there a long time, and it felt like I wanted to do other things. So yeah, I did leave there in 81.
Where did you head off to? Did you start freelancing for other role-playing games? I feel like there's a gap in at least my understanding of your career before you start picking up video game work.
Oh, yeah. So, I went back home and I went to university again for a year studying fine art. And then I went to an illustration school for a couple of years. And during that time, I also worked part-time at a software company that made graphical paint systems on a computer. And it was a very small software company. And then I quit school and worked for a slightly larger software company that was doing the same thing, making paint systems. For the Amiga and PC, sort of testing it and making promotional artwork. This was made with this software, and eventually started doing some interface design for them. I did that for about 8 years. And yeah, during that time, I started freelancing for some video games like Starflight 1 and 2. Did some, what I think of them as pretty successful, but just little illustrations, with, I can't remember how many colors we had. You could pick from more, but I think you wound up with like, I don't remember exactly. You had to pick your 24 colors that you would use and put the artwork down pixel by pixel. It was a cool discipline.
It's sort of interesting to me that you kind of hit TSR during the moment they were no longer like new, they were sort of established, but it was really exploding. And then you transitioned to the software industry, which was also sort of like in that same sweet spot.
Yeah, I thought those were interesting times. Like after Star Control, I did freelance artwork and music and voice and writing for Star Control, especially Star Control 2. Those were neat times when the development team was just Paul Ritchie, the designer, and Fred Ford, the programmer. They could come up with, that's all you needed. You know, they had a lot of people doing, like me, doing content for them. But that was a whole development team of a fantastic computer game. And now it's got to be like 100 people.
Oh, easy. Yeah.
A title.
You continued on largely in video games, right?
Right. Yeah. After I left the paint and desktop publishing software company, I started working full-time in computer games for, I guess it was Spectrum Holobyte / Microprose, and was a lead artist for several video games there. Again, over about 8 years or so. And we made some Star Trek games and Mech Commander and some other various games. And then after that, I moved to Toys for Bob, which was Paul and Fred's company, the guys who did Star Control. And I worked for them. Eventually, they became part of Activision, and worked for them almost 17 years.
You did some design work for Skylanders, right?
Yes. Well, that and Toys for Bob, I was a game designer. And that was past the time of the designer, speccing things out and guiding programmers. And we actually wrote using, tools written by real programmers. We created the gameplay, wrote the AIs, and placed all the entities, and created the designer mesh for the artists to beautify.
Like looking through your career and hearing the different avenues that you've reached out to throughout your career, it's very interesting because you tend to pop up at exactly the right moment as the industry is about to boom. And, you started out young and you really hit the ground running with TSR and are prolific in the amount of work that you did in a very short period of time before you picked up and you moved on to something else. How does it feel looking back on that, knowing that, when you're young and you're getting into any industry, whether it's writing, filmmaking, making music, you have that moment in time where everything feels like it's the most important thing in the world and you're firing on all cylinders and your creative output is unparalleled in that moment because it's the Old West. It's wild. You are free with everything that you're doing. What is it like to be able to have experienced that in multiple different industries?
Well, the way you describe it is definitely how I felt at TSR. I mean, that was, I can't remember exactly when, but it was maybe a month or a few months in. I had just finished one of the playing aid illustrations, which were pretty interesting because they weren't for full color. You had to make a little, a separate black and white drawing that was aligned with the registration marks for each tone. Anyway, one of them came out really good. I was real happy. And I just looked out the window. I was like, this is the pinnacle of my life. It was neat because everyone was very confident, although nobody really knew what they were doing at the same time. You know what I mean? Everyone was really happy. The designers and writers, everyone was kind of doing their dream job all at once together. And very prolific times. I remember I would just concentrate so hard, and especially when doing black and white illustrations, at the end of the day, I couldn't see straight. My blurry vision,
Oh, man.
This was Lake Geneva. It was a small town. There was like one optometrist. He's like, yep, you need glasses. So I got glasses. And one of my visits back home, I think maybe it was my mom or somebody's like, you go see one here. And the guy's like, you don't need glasses. So beware those deep in the woods obstetricians, they're the only game in town and they're going to sell you some glasses. Anyway, it turned out there's a word for that. I can't remember what it was. It's a common thing. But yeah, we would just nonstop draw, paint. It was really neat taking directions from the designers. This is the monster. This is what it does. This is what it looks like. Sometimes it was real specific. Sometimes it was open-ended. But that was really, really a lot of fun.
You grew up in the Bay Area, right?
Yeah, Berkeley, California.
Wow. Right.
That's where I am still. I've visited a couple times over those 3 years back home.
That must have been a little bit of a culture shock going to Wisconsin from Berkeley.
Yeah, it was. It was. But the people there were really cool. The people at TSR, especially Dave Sutherland, who was the art director when I first got there, and for a while. This was the first time I was ever away from home. I had no idea what to do. I didn't really care either. And, I just moved out there, boom, and he had a little place for me in the upstairs of the Dragon magazine offices.
All right.
I had a hot plate and a bed, and that was it. Yeah, but yeah, it's true culture shock. Yeah, I was still young, so I wasn't like a foodie or anything like that. To be deprived of all the Bay Area had, so it wasn't so much that, but it was a small town, and there was a limited amount of things to do. But we had a pretty good time there. Like after work, there would be activities in the evening. Let's see, there was a Fight in the Skies run by Mike Carr night. It wasn't every week. We would play games in the evening. Oh, and eventually I did become a roommate with Lawrence Schick and his wife, and they had scored this really amazing rental. It was completely furnished down to dishes and a pool table and all the furniture. And so I went from a weird, austere existence to pretty comfortable for a while.
I've heard that you have quite the reputation as both a player and a runner of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, well, I love doing both for sure. Yeah. When we first started, we had several different games, and it morphed. And we discovered other people in the Bay Area, Berkeley and nearby, who would run games. But yeah, I love doing that, creating the maps, and I would draw magic items and give them out on little index cards, black and white illustrations with colored in with watercolor.
Oh man.
I give them to my players as treasure. And playing in the games, of course, was huge too. I had a huge folder of all my characters, as everybody does, but it was quite large.
You mentioned Frazetta. Do you have any other particular artistic influences?
Well, I really like Bernie Wrightson's Black and White.
Nice.
I had been subscribing to the Warren magazines.
Creepy and Eerie,
and Vampirella. And before that, a friend of mine, when we were, I don't know, 9, 10, his father had like a secret box of the lowest of low black and white horror comics, that were just nothing but decapitations and eviscerations. And I just thought those were so great. And so Warren was kind of a higher quality version of that. And they had all those Frazetta covers and so many things. But yeah, I also like Dr. Seuss. I really love Dr. Seuss. His environments, especially, the weird spires and stairways, impossible sort of geometry.
In a million years, I never would have guessed that, but hearing it, it makes so much sense. I read Dr. Seuss books to my kid all the time, and like I could totally see the influence. Absolutely.
And he's so amazing because it's just all out of his head. There's no reference there. There's no models he was looking at. It's just pure imagination.
Do you think that your palette kind of comes from Seuss too? I was going to say that your palette is sort of like warm and sort of an unusual palette, kind of veering towards the pastel for somebody who kind of came up with Warren comics. But now that you've mentioned Seuss, I kind of wonder if that's where that sensibility came from, maybe?
I'm not really sure about that because Dr. Seuss's colors oftentimes black and white and colored with solid colors. I mean, there were a few that were full color. Like, I can't remember. It was the one where there's all the water action, somebody's pool, and there he was full on painting. But yeah, I know what you mean. There's definitely something unique about my colors, but I'm not quite sure where that came from.
I would even say that a lot of the work that you've done does reach from a place of pure imagination as well, because although you did have horror mags and you did have other kind of things to influence you growing up, stylistically, the artwork that you were putting out during that time period where you'd have a writer come up to you and be like, okay, this is the monster, this is what it does. And for you to be able to run with it and kind of add dimension to it, I would say that a lot of the work that you've done is that pure, unadulterated imagination, especially looking at the monster work that you have done throughout the years. It's pretty cool.
For people, I wouldn't use any reference either and just try and make them up, except when like you had to try and figure out what a hand looked like or something like that. But I never worked from models.
Can we talk real quick about some of your iconic covers? Because as you know, in the publishing industry, you really do rely on the covers of the books or the packages to really draw people in, because that's the first thing that they see. One of the things I'm always mostly drawn to is the deities and demigods as a book. Purple is going to stand out more than anything else in the world. It's such a beautiful regal color, but there's so much going on there.
Yeah, well, I'm very fond of the back of that cover. It's a wraparound, and there's a guy in the back who's worshiping a Cthulhu-like thing, and the gods in the sky came out pretty good. And there's like a little Stonehenge in the distance. So yeah, that came out pretty good. And the basic cover too, I would mention when you started talking about covers, that one had some essence of D&D, like the treasure and the monster and the confrontation. That was pretty successful. And a lot of people mentioned that one to me too.
Would you say that that's the one that people bring up most?
Yeah, a little bit more. Yeah.
Because you have sort of like a trifecta, because you did the expert box as well, and then deities and demigods. And it's just like, how do you pick one? So I was kind of like wondering in aggregate over the years, which one you felt made the largest impact on your fans?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's the basic box based on just purely talking to people, not doing any research at all. But because I think that when that hit the shelves, it was, D&D was really exploding. And that was more accessible, I think, to a little bit slightly younger group. I'm not exactly sure about that. But yeah, people mention that to me a lot at conventions and things.
Do you recall if the rest of the packaging's color palette came out of your art or vice versa? I've always thought that the magenta and bright neon green in that box, sort of the packaging design, is like such an extra slap in the face to get you to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I made the painting for the basic cover, and I don't think there was any mention about what the box color was going to be. I think they probably picked up that purple color, as something that would go with the painting.
It's very interesting to me as well with all of this artwork, because especially during this era, a lot of the ideas are very new. So one of the things I've always appreciated about your work is that when you draw a spell happening or you draw the visual interpretation of a spell, it's always the spirit of the spell that I think appears versus the actual, like, what the spell does itself. Did you get a lot of direction on that when it was being presented to you as what they wanted you to bring out in the paintings and in the art?
If it was going to be a specific spell, or if I was thinking of a specific spell, we had the player's handbook and I could read and follow along, and then, take liberties where allowed. For example, I don't remember exactly what magic missile was described as, other than there could be more than one and they could hit multiple targets and things like that. So yeah, the descriptions would guide me. Sometimes it would be something made up that could be this or that.
And so do you think that some of the way that you portrayed stuff has shaped some of the way things are presented down the line? So for instance, you follow the direction of what the writer is reaching out to you with. You follow the direction of like the player's handbook, but sometimes the art inspires a new direction of things. So say like some of the portrayals that you may put out there for like character design or for spell design or things that pop up go, maybe we should take it in this direction.
Yeah, I think that happened on occasion with the monsters and spells and things. I remember I was playing in Dave Hargrave's campaign back before I moved to TSR, and he had an undead dragon in his campaign that I thought was really cool. And I just added an undead dragon to the White Plume Mountain map, even though it didn't exist in D&D yet. And then it did creep into the game later on. So thanks, David Hargrave.
Oh, wow. That's a great little tidbit.
Yeah, I think it's up in the upper left in the map.
How was Hargrave's campaign? I've always read that was a pretty wild time.
It was really high powered, and in terms of, the magic items, levels, and monsters. He was really passionate about it and serious. So there was that aspect of it too. Yeah, that was one of the different gaming groups that we bounced around in. Very imaginative and deadly.
This actually kind of segues into something that I have been wondering about a lot. You're interesting because you came from the coast. You're not really a Midwesterner. So recently I was talking to Jim Ward, and because of just everything about Metamorphosis Alpha and Gamma World, I kind of was just like, are you a Devo fan? And he was just like, no, that's a weird question. Why would you ask that? But I mean, so many people of my generation were gravitating to heavy metal and D&D at the same time. It feels kind of weird to me that a lot of the creators are just sort of like, heavy metal, no, that's not for me. But you come from a very sort of punk rock section of the country, or a counterculture section of the country. I was wondering if A, like a punk ethos kind of enters into your work at all, and B, if you could speak to that sort of in a larger way about Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing games in general, why those two kind of things go together like chocolate and peanut butter.
That was definitely the kind of music that I liked, new wave and punk, and I listened to it constantly while I was working at TSR. And yeah, Devo too, for sure. Very, very good. I don't know how much that influenced me, other than, it was at the time coming from a place that wasn't mainstream, that was, I thought, spoke about a different perspective, breaking the mold and doing new imaginative things. I still remember the Devo doing Satisfaction on Saturday Night Live. I don't know if you guys remember that clip.
Oh, yeah.
But it just blew my mind. And when I watch Saturday Night Live these days and I see the musical acts, it's like, wow, what happened to humanity? There's got to be more imaginative stuff that people can do, but something happened there. Anyway, I'm not sure how that influenced, other than it was something to admire because a group of people were trying to do something different.
It's one of those things that I feel like, because D&D and our role-playing games are sort of outside the norm, and they were new just in the same way that kind of punk rock and new wave were new at the same times, it seems to me that there should be more of a historical crossover than there really is. I just kind of think that it's sort of funny that I think in aggregate, especially like somebody like me, I kind of project a punk rock sensibility on people who seemed like they should be counterculture in some way, but in a lot of ways, aside of their hobby, like the role-playing hobby, they're rather square. There's just sort of like a weird interplay there that I find kind of intriguing.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting and I think pretty accurate observation.
And Devo is like the most depressing band in the world, I think, because like they were so good and they make everything else pale in comparison, even decades later. So I totally sympathize with your recent perusal of Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird. It's like being an old fuddy-duddy about imagination. But yeah, I don't know. There's got to be something more to discover, or maybe not. Maybe it's played out and we're just going to split hairs forever.
Well, speaking of decades later, now you've been in the business a very long time. You've created a plethora of different styles of art. Looking back on some of the things that you created back in the day, as much as the cover of Deities and Demigods is one of your most iconic works, is there a piece that you did back in the D&D days that you look back on and you'd be like, man, that was the one, but it's not one that everyone talks about?
I think about the Dragon 55 cover a lot as one of my favorite color pieces.
That's the one with the sort of melty dragon?
It's not really a dragon, a large monster and a little whimsical, probably ill-intentioned magical figure is sort of introducing a single adventurer to it. And it's a little more Cthulhian than dragon-like. It is got depending mouth tendrils and things or drool coming down. So maybe that's what you're thinking of when you're thinking melty. It's not really that obscure, but that's one that I'm really fond of. And Black and White Shub Niggurath from Deities and Demigods is one I mention a lot. And the Three Wizards dividing treasure from, I think it's the module in the basic set. I was also thinking the other day about the little mini game Revolt on Antares. There's a black and white there that spans 2 pages. That's one of my favorites. It's kind of like a montage of these different sci-fi factions.
In recent years with the old school revival, you've kind of been commissioned to do cover work again for not D&D proper, but sort of D&D next door neighbor. How have you found kind of coming back to the old ways?
Oh, it's great. I love doing the work. I never stopped loving it. It's just that I was doing other things. So it's great to connect with people who are writing these modules and adventures and, doing it again. Goodman Games and is the company I've done the most work for. And recently they did the Dying Earth, DCC Dying Earth based on Jack Vance. So that was really cool because Jack Vance, he's probably my favorite science fiction fantasy author. So doing work based on his stuff was great.
I backed that Kickstarter and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, well, we were just playing the game the other night because I need to get much more familiar with that since I'm rewriting an adventure for that. It was one of the Kickstarters. It did so well. I guess they initially ran out of some stretch goals, so they added that.
I think one of the final stretch goal was just like, we're going to go to Jack Vance's house and see what happens.
Right.
Which I think is such a great, like, well, we're all out, but like, here's something.
Yep. I don't know how many people can go on that. Maybe it's a report from the people who go. I'm not sure.
They rent one of those celebrity home tours in Hollywood. They get the bus, the double decker, and they just cruise around. And, and this is where Gygax used to live. And this is where Dave Arneson lived. And here is Jack Vance's house. Let's see if he's home.
Are there any other projects that you're working on that you're particularly excited about?
Let's see. I did my first Magic card.
Ooh.
For WotC. And I did that, I guess it was last year, and it came out this year. And I couldn't talk about it till it came out. I'm doing another little something for them, but I can't talk about it. And let's see, I'm doing a cover for Necrotic Gnome Games.
Oh,
and,
wow.
They're doing a box set, I guess another re-release or something. And that cover's going pretty good. I'm working on that right now.
I'm not going to lie. I was talking to Matt from Exalted Funeral about having you on the show, and he's like, try to get Erol to talk about the cover because I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it, but if he talks about it, then I can talk about it. Some insider trading, I guess, or something akin to it.
I've done a couple of book covers recently. One for Nick Cole, Into the Unknown, I believe is the title. I posted that on my Facebook not too long ago. And I finished another one. I'm going to post that when he sends me the link, probably end of September. And then, I'm going to do some artwork for a module that's going to come out for GaryCon.
Oh,
cool.
Paul Stormberg is producing that.
Very exciting. So this has been an amazing conversation, Erol. And I just want to ask one more question before we go home on this episode. With the enduring popularity of Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games, does it still feel awesome to you to be able to put ink to the canvas and really have your work be appreciated by a whole new generation of players?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky to be able to keep doing this. And that never gets old, but especially the period of coming up with a concept is a real joy. Then if I come up with a good idea, trying to do justice to it, that's the hard part. I feel like I'm communicating with a lot of old friends, mainly. But yeah, I hope along the way, some new people can appreciate the work as well.
Well, very cool. Erol, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. This has been for us a long time coming, so we're super grateful that you had the time to chat with us tonight. And dear listener, I can tell you, if you don't know, you should go find out. Erol Otus is the GOAT. And this has been another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG podcast. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. If you really like the show, think about becoming a patron, patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got early release episodes. We've got a behind the scenes look at my RPG 321 action and the very first adventure, Rocket to Russia. We've got a behind the scenes look at Stu's book, still tentatively titled Experience Points. We've also got a cool Discord specifically for the patrons, and we've got some other cool stuff coming up that we can't talk about yet, but we will be letting you know about soon. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.